My daughter said I was too poor to be a good mom. She regretted it when I got rich. I'd been up since 5 a.m. making Lily's favorite French toast when she stormed into the kitchen, slamming her phone on the counter I'd just cleaned. "You're literally the worst mom in Beverly Hills High," she announced, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Do you know what Mia just posted? Her mom gave her $2,000 for a random Tuesday shopping trip, on top of her $400 weekly allowance. I kept flipping the French toast, the same breakfast I'd made every Tuesday for 3 years because she mentioned before it reminded her of better times. Morning to you too, sweetie. Here's the thing about being a single mom who had her daughter at 19. You're always trying to make up for something. The father who left, the grandparents who said you'd ruined your life, the life experiences you couldn't give her. I chose teaching specifically for the hours, turned down 3 promotions to stay classroom-based, drove a 15-year-old Toyota so she could have tutoring, dance classes, and the right clothes. Are you even listening? Lily grabbed the spatula from my hand. Chloe's mom is taking her to Paris for spring break. Mia's going to Cabo. And me? I'll be here. Again. Because my mom is a teacher who can't even afford cable. She scrolled through her phone aggressively, shoving it in my face. Look at this group chat. They're planning spa days, Botox appointments, shopping trips, and I have to keep saying, can't make it, because you had me as a teenager and ruined both our lives. The irony was palpable. I'd been accepted to Northwestern Pre-Med when I found out I was pregnant. My parents kicked me out. Lily's father vanished. But looking at my beautiful, ungrateful daughter, I'd made the same choice every single day for 16 years. Her over everything. I'm doing my best. Your best is pathetic, she screamed over me. Do you know what Mia told everyone? That her mom offered to bring me to Cabo as the charity case. The poor kid. That's what I am because of you. You know what really kills me? Her voice cracked with rage. You chose this. You chose to be poor. Those moms love their daughters enough to work hard, to provide, to make something of themselves. You just gave up. Something inside me shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion from 16 years of sacrifice. Maybe it was the way she said, chose to be poor, like I hadn't chosen her every single day. Fine, I said quietly, setting down the French toast. You want what Mia has? You'll get exactly what Mia has. Every single thing she gets. She instantly ran upstairs, FaceTiming her friends about her upcoming glow-up and how she'd finally fixed her cheap mom. Monday morning, I was gone before Lily's alarm went off and left $400 on the counter. My phone buzzed at 7 a.m. halfway into my shift. Oh my gosh, Mom! I knew you'd pull through. That afternoon, I got a text that would have broken my heart 6 weeks ago. At mall with Mia. Using Uber. Don't wait up. The first real crisis came 2 weeks in. I was teaching an evening class when my phone lit up with texts. Mom, please come home. I need you. Jake broke up with me. 2 months ago, I would have left work immediately. But Mia's mom didn't leave her law firm when Mia's boyfriend cheated. She gave her money for shopping therapy. I transferred $200. Treat yourself. This is what Mia's mom did last month. The typing bubbles appeared and disappeared for 3 minutes. Finally, when are you coming home? I'm working. To give you what you wanted. Week 3 brought parent-teacher conferences. I'd circled the date in red on our kitchen calendar every year since kindergarten. This year, I scheduled tutoring clients instead. My phone exploded during a session. From Lily's counselor. Ms. Williams, we really needed you here today. Lily's college essays are concerning. She's never missed a deadline before this month. That evening, I found her college essay draft on the kitchen table. The prompt was, describe a challenge you've overcome. She wrote about feeling like no one was there when she needed it most. I left $400 on top of it and went to bed. But the real breaking point was her sweet 16. Friday afternoon, while I was teaching, she texted, can you at least come to my birthday dinner tomorrow? 7 p.m. at Nobu. Nope, I'm working. But there's $250 in my dresser for your party. Mia's mom missed her sweet 16 dinner too. She just left me on scene. On the night of her birthday, I came home at 10 p.m. to find her in her party dress on the kitchen floor. Mascara everywhere. No one came to my birthday. The waiter sang to an empty table. Her voice cracked, and she said the words I'd been waiting to hear all along. I lowered myself onto the cold kitchen floor next to her, my knees cracking as I bent down. My heart was beating, so hard I could feel it in my throat. Lily looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Mascara streaked down both cheeks in dark lines, and she whispered something so quiet I almost didn't hear it. I just wanted you. The words hit me somewhere deep in my chest, like someone had reached in and squeezed. All the anger I'd been carrying for weeks, all the hurt from her calling me pathetic and saying I'd ruined her life, it was still there. But underneath it, I felt something else. Relief, maybe. Or recognition. Because I'd been waiting to hear exactly that, even if I didn't know it until this moment. I didn't say anything right away. Every instinct in my body wanted to apologize, to promise I'd fix everything, to go back to making French toast at 5 a.m. and driving her everywhere and saying yes to whatever she needed. But that's what got us here in the first place. Me giving and giving until there was nothing left, and her taking without ever seeing what it cost. So instead, I just stayed quiet for a long moment, listening to her cry, and then I said 4 words. I'm here right now. We sat together on the cold tile floor in silence while she cried harder, her shoulders shaking, and I put my hand on her back but didn't try to make it better with words. After about 20 minutes, she wiped her face with her hands and asked if we could talk tomorrow when she was calmer. I agreed that was probably better than trying to solve everything tonight when we were both exhausted and emotional. I told her no Uber money tonight, but I'd drive her to the school in the morning. She nodded without arguing, which was new. She got up slowly, her party dress wrinkled and stained with tears, and went upstairs to her room. I heard her door close softly, not slam. That night, I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the past month in my head like a movie I couldn't turn off. I saw myself leaving money on the counter instead of making breakfast, transferring $200 when she needed me after the breakup, missing parent-teacher conferences I'd never missed before, putting $400 on top of her college essay instead of reading it, missing her birthday dinner. Every single choice I'd made to prove my point, to teach her a lesson about what it felt like to have money but no mom. And it worked. She learned. But somewhere along the way, I forgot I was supposed to be her mother, not her punishment. I'd been so focused on making her understand what she'd thrown away that I actually threw it away myself. The experiment proved my point but damaged my daughter in the process, and lying there in the dark, I finally saw that clearly. The next morning was awkward and quiet as I drove Lily to the school. Neither of us knew how to start the conversation we needed to have. She stared out the window at the houses going by. I kept my eyes on the road. The silence felt heavy but not angry, just uncertain. Before she got out of the car in the drop-off line, I said we needed to make a real plan after school, not just me throwing money at her or withholding it. She agreed and closed the car door without her usual slam. At work, Danielle Franks pulled me aside during my planning period. She closed her classroom door and asked if we could talk. She said she'd noticed I'd been distracted lately and missed some grading deadlines, which wasn't like me. Her voice was concerned, not angry, and she asked if everything was okay at home. The question made me realize how much this situation with Lily had affected my job performance. I'd been so focused on the money and the tutoring and proving my point that I'd let my actual teaching slip. I admitted to Danielle that I'd been taking on too many tutoring clients and dealing with family issues. She listened without interrupting and then warned me that burnout helps no one. She suggested I might need to cut back on the extra work temporarily to get things stable at home. The idea terrified me financially because that tutoring money had been covering Lily's new expenses, but I knew Danielle was right. I couldn't keep working evenings and weekends and still be present for my daughter. Something had to give. That afternoon, Lily and I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open to my bank account. I'd never shown her the real numbers before, never let her see exactly how much I made or where it all went. She watched the screen as I pulled up my checking account and showed her my last paycheck. Then I showed her rent, utilities, car insurance, groceries, her dance classes from before all this started. Her eyes got wider as I scrolled through the expenses. Then I showed her the tutoring deposits and how they'd been barely covering her new $400 weekly allowance, plus all the Uber rides and shopping trips. And finally, I showed her the overdraft fees from the past month, 6 of them at $35 each because I'd been transferring money I didn't actually have. Lily stared at the screen and said quietly that she didn't know it was this bad. I bit my tongue to keep from saying what I wanted to say, that she never asked, that she never wondered where the money came from. Instead, I explained that I needed to stop the tutoring overload, which meant the $400 weekly allowance experiment ends now. Not as punishment, but because I literally couldn't afford it anymore. And more importantly, because it wasn't helping either of us. She surprised me then by asking what happens next instead of demanding money or getting angry. I told her honestly that I didn't have all the answers yet. I proposed we both think about what we actually need versus what we've been doing and talk again tomorrow after I'd had time to come up with a real plan. She nodded and closed the laptop carefully, like she was afraid it might break. That evening around 8 p.m., someone knocked on our front door. I opened it to find Lewis Stanley from next door, holding a casserole dish and looking uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and said he'd noticed Lily home alone quite a bit lately, especially after dark, and he wanted to check if everything was okay. My face went hot with embarrassment because I hadn't realized anyone was paying that much attention to our house. I thanked him for the casserole and admitted I'd been working extra tutoring sessions in the evenings to cover some expenses. Lewis nodded and didn't ask for details, just said if I ever needed someone to be around as an emergency contact for Lily on those late nights, he'd be happy to help. The relief that washed over me was immediate, and I asked if he really meant that. He said absolutely, gave me his cell number and told me to text him anytime I'd be working past 9 p.m. so he could keep an eye out. I went back inside feeling grateful, but also ashamed that a neighbor had to step in because I'd been so focused on proving my point to Lily that I'd left her alone too much. The next morning at work, I checked my email during my planning period and found a message from Antoinette Morel, Lily's school counselor. The subject line read, "Urgent, Lily's college applications," and my stomach dropped before I even opened it. Antoinette wrote that Lily had missed another deadline for her college essay extension, and she was genuinely worried now. The email was kind in tone, but the message was clear and firm. Lily needed actual support, not money, and whatever was happening at home needed to change soon, or her college applications would suffer permanent damage. She listed 3 upcoming deadlines that Lily was at risk of missing completely, including her top choice school. I read the email twice, then printed it and put it in my bag to look at again later when I could think straight. I responded to Antoinette right away and asked if I could meet with her later that week, just me without Lily, to explain what had been going on. She replied within an hour saying she had time Thursday afternoon at 3:30 p.m. and she'd hold the slot for me. I marked it in my phone calendar and set 3 reminder alarms because I couldn't miss this one. Thursday came and I actually showed up on time, sitting in Antoinette's small office surrounded by college posters and motivational quotes. I told her everything from the beginning. The French toast morning, Lily's cruel words, my experiment with giving her exactly what she asked for, the missed birthday, all of it. Antoinette listened without interrupting, taking a few notes but mostly just giving me her full attention. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before saying that she understood what I'd been trying to teach Lily, but the method had backfired. She said this pattern of transaction instead of connection was fixable, but it needed professional help, not just good intentions. She wrote down the name and number of a family therapist named Emmeline Lane, who specialized in parent-teen relationships and communication issues. That night after dinner, I brought up the idea of therapy to Lily while we were both in the kitchen. She was loading the dishwasher and I was wiping down counters, both of us doing the tasks on autopilot. I said Antoinette had suggested we talk to someone together about everything that had happened over the past few months. Lily stopped loading dishes and turned to look at me with this expression like I'd suggested something crazy. She said therapy was for people with serious problems, not for us, and she didn't want to sit in some office talking about her feelings to a stranger. I didn't push back or argue, just kept wiping the counter and said okay, but I was going to talk to someone myself because I needed help figuring out how to be a better mom. That seemed to surprise her because she asked why I thought I needed therapy. I explained that the past few months had shown me I didn't know how to set boundaries without turning them into punishment, and I wanted to learn how to do better. She didn't say anything else, just went back to loading the dishwasher, but I could tell she was thinking about it. 2 days later, I called Emmeline Lane's office and booked an appointment for just myself. The receptionist asked if this was for family therapy or individual, and I said individual for now, but maybe family later. She scheduled me for the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. Walking into Emmeline's office that first time felt like admitting defeat in some way, like I was confessing that 16 years of trying my best hadn't been good enough. The waiting room had comfortable chairs and magazines and soft music playing, all designed to make people feel calm. Emmeline came out to get me right on time, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Her office was smaller than I expected, with 2 chairs facing each other and a small table with a box of tissues. I told Emmeline the whole story from start to finish, including parts that made me look bad like leaving money on Lily's essay and missing her birthday dinner. She listened carefully and took some notes, asking clarifying questions here and there but mostly just letting me talk. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and said she didn't judge me for the experiment because she understood what I'd been trying to accomplish. But then she reframed it in a way that hit me hard. She said I'd been trying to teach Lily that money wasn't love, but I'd done it by withholding both money and love at the same time. I'd removed my presence, my attention, my emotional support, everything, and replaced it all with cash. So Lily learned that neither money nor connection was reliable from me. Emmeline pulled out a notebook and started writing down specific phrases and approaches for me. She gave me scripts for setting boundaries without making them feel like punishment, for being present without falling into martyrdom, for saying no while still showing love. I filled 3 pages of my own notebook with her suggestions, writing as fast as I could to capture everything. Armed with Emmeline's advice, I decided to try a new approach that weekend. Lily and I were driving to the grocery store on Saturday afternoon, stuck in traffic on a sunny day with the windows down. The car felt like a safe space somehow, both of us looking forward at the road instead of at each other. I took a breath and said I loved her, and that love didn't mean giving her everything she wanted or nothing at all. It meant showing up. She glanced at me but didn't interrupt. I continued and said I was setting a new curfew of 10 p.m. on weeknights with check-ins, not as punishment but as structure, because that's what parents are supposed to provide. I explained that the curfew wasn't about controlling her, it was about knowing she was safe, and teaching her that boundaries exist even in loving relationships. Lily was quiet for a long moment, then asked if this meant the money experiment was over. I said yes, we were done with that, but we also weren't going back to how things were before. We were finding something new that worked better for both of us. Lily tested the new curfew that very same Saturday night. She'd gone to a movie with some friends from her history class, not Mia or Chloe for once. At 10 p.m., I was sitting on the couch watching The Door, and my phone buzzed with a text from her saying she was running late. The movie went longer than expected. She'd be home by 10:30. I texted back okay, and sat there feeling this weird mix of anxiety and hope. She walked in at 10:28 p.m. looking nervous, like she expected me to yell. Instead, I just said I appreciated her texting me to let me know she'd be late. That was exactly the kind of communication I needed. But I also reminded her that next time she needed to leave earlier, or pick a different movie time to make curfew. She nodded and said she would, then went upstairs to her room. It was a small step toward actual communication, instead of just demands and silence, but it felt significant. The following week, another email arrived from the school. This one marked urgent in red. The message said Lily's essay extension closed in 5 days, and after that she'd missed the deadline completely for her top choice school. There would be no more extensions, no exceptions. The window was closing. I forwarded the email to Lily without adding any commentary of my own, just the forward with the school's message. Then I sent her a separate text saying I'd help if she wanted help, but I wouldn't write it for her or bribe her to finish it. The choice was completely hers to make. She left me on red for 3 hours before finally responding with just, okay. Wednesday night, I'd convinced Lily to try one therapy session with me and Emmeline, scheduled for 5 p.m. on Friday. She'd agreed reluctantly, saying she'd try it once, but if she hated it, we weren't going back. Thursday afternoon, her phone lit up with texts while we were eating dinner, and she grabbed it quickly and read them with growing excitement. Some kid from the school was throwing a party Friday night, a big one, and everyone was going. Lily looked at me across the table with this torn expression on her face. I could see the old pattern trying to reassert itself, her instinct to choose social status and fitting in over dealing with our actual problems. She asked if we could reschedule the therapy appointment because this party was really important, and she'd already missed so many social things. I felt that familiar pull to either give in or get angry, but instead I just sat there and thought about what Emmeline would say. I looked at Lily across the table and made myself speak calmly, even though my brain was screaming at me to either give in or get angry. I told her she could go to the party if she wanted. That was her choice. But I needed her to understand something first. If she picked therapy tonight, I wouldn't bring it up later as proof she made the right choice or use it against her somehow. And if she picked the party, I wouldn't guilt trip her about it or make her feel bad. But the therapy appointment wouldn't get rescheduled for another 2 weeks because Emmeline's calendar was packed. I watched her face as she processed this, saw her chewing her bottom lip the way she always did when she was thinking hard about something. She asked if I was serious about not rescheduling, and I nodded. Then she grabbed her phone and texted someone quickly before looking back up at me. She said she was going to the party, her voice defensive like she expected me to argue. But I just said okay, and started clearing the dinner plates. She sat there for another minute like she was waiting for the fight, then went upstairs to get ready. I heard her leave around 8, the front door closing softly like she was trying not to remind me she'd chosen the party over working on our relationship. I sat on the couch with a book I couldn't focus on, and tried not to check my phone every 5 minutes. Around 9:30 my phone buzzed and I grabbed it expecting some emergency, but it was just Lily saying she'd be home soon. I texted back okay, and went to the kitchen to make tea, the kind she used to drink when she was little and couldn't sleep. She walked in at 9:45 looking completely deflated, her makeup smudged and her shoulders hunched forward. I asked what happened and she dropped her purse on the counter and said the party was fine. Nothing dramatic, but she left early because she couldn't stand being there anymore. She explained that Mia and Chloe spent the entire time talking about their spring break trips, showing everyone photos and videos from their phones and making plans for summer in the Hamptons. Lily said she realized something while watching them, that she didn't actually enjoy being around them anymore. They just made her feel bad about herself, and like she was constantly failing some test she didn't sign up for. She admitted she didn't know how to step away from the friend group though, because they'd been her whole social life for 2 years, and she'd built her identity around fitting in with them. I felt every muscle in my body tense up with the urge to say I told you so, to point out that I'd been saying this exact thing for months, but I forced myself to stay quiet and just poured the tea instead. I handed her the mug and sat down next to her at the table, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. She wrapped both hands around the cup and stared into it like the tea might have answers, and I just sat there with her while she processed everything. After a few minutes, she started talking again, saying she felt stupid for not seeing it sooner, for thinking those girls actually cared about her, when really she was just the charity case they kept around to feel better about themselves. I listened without interrupting, without trying to fix it, or make her feel better with empty reassurances, and something shifted between us. It was the first real conversation we'd had in months that wasn't about money or what I was doing wrong, just her talking and me listening like we used to do before everything got so broken. The next morning, I woke up with my stomach in knots because Danielle was observing my class today as part of her concern about my performance. I got to the school early and checked my lesson plan 3 times, organized my desk, made sure every handout was perfect. She slipped into the back of my classroom right as the bell rang and I tried to teach like normal, but I kept catching myself looking at her to gauge her reaction. The class went fine. Nothing amazing, but nothing terrible either. And when the students left for lunch, Danielle came up to my desk with a thoughtful expression. She said my teaching was still strong. That wasn't the problem. But she could see I was running on empty and it was starting to show in small ways. She suggested I drop 2 of my tutoring clients to free up predictable evenings for family time. Not as a punishment, but as a way to prevent actual burnout. I started doing the math in my head immediately. 2 clients meant losing about $800 a month and my chest got tight thinking about it. But I looked at Danielle's concerned face and thought about Lily sitting in the kitchen last night finally opening up to me, and I knew she was right. The extra money was costing me my daughter in ways that couldn't be measured on a bank statement. I told Danielle I'd do it, and she squeezed my shoulder before leaving, and I spent my planning period sending emails to 2 families explaining I couldn't continue tutoring their kids. That evening, I found Lily doing homework in her room and told her about dropping the tutoring clients, explaining that I was choosing time with her over extra income because our relationship mattered more than having a bigger buffer in the bank account. She looked up from her textbook with this surprised expression and asked if that meant we'd have less money, and I admitted yes, we'd be tighter on the budget, but we'd make it work. Something changed in her face then, like she was seeing me differently, and she asked quietly if we could try that therapy session I'd mentioned. She added the condition that if she hated it, we didn't have to go back, and I agreed immediately without making a big deal out of it. I pulled out my phone right there and booked us an appointment with Emmeline for the following week, showing Lily the confirmation email so she knew it was real. The day of our first joint therapy session, I was more nervous than Lily seemed to be, which surprised me. We sat in Emmeline's waiting room not talking, both of us scrolling through our phones to avoid eye contact, and when she called us back, we followed her into a small office with 2 couches facing each other. The first 20 minutes were uncomfortable and awkward, with both of us giving short defensive answers to Emmeline's questions and shooting looks at each other like we were keeping score. But then Emmeline asked Lily to talk about the charity case comment from Mia, and something broke open. Lily's voice got shaky as she described how humiliating it felt to be the poor friend, to have Mia's mom offer to bring her to Cabo like she was some kind of pity project, to know that her friends talked about her financial situation behind her back. I sat there listening without interrupting, without trying to fix it or defend myself or explain all the reasons why we didn't have money for expensive trips. I just let her talk and really heard what she was saying, that she'd felt ashamed and less than for years, and had taken it out on me instead of dealing with the actual problem. Emmeline nodded and took notes, then asked us both what we wanted to get out of therapy, and for the first time we gave honest answers instead of defensive ones. Near the end of the session, Emmeline gave us homework. She wanted us to review our budget together honestly, so Lily could see the real numbers, and she wanted us to establish one weekly non-monetary ritual we'd both commit to. Lily looked skeptical but said she'd try to. I felt a tiny spark of hope that maybe we could actually fix this. That weekend, we sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop open to my bank account and all my bills spread out in front of us. I walked Lily through every expense in detail, showing her the rent payment, the car insurance, the groceries, the utilities, the student loan payment I'd been making for 16 years. I showed her the overdraft fees from the past month, 4 of them at $35 each because I'd been trying to keep up with her $100 weekly allowance on top of everything else. She stared at the numbers with her mouth slightly open, and I watched her do the math in her head. She said quietly that she never thought about money as finite before, like there was just money, and you either had enough or you didn't. But seeing it all laid out like this made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I took a deep breath and decided to tell her something I'd never explained in detail, about how I'd been accepted to Northwestern for pre-med with a full scholarship, how I'd had my whole future planned out before I found out I was pregnant. I told her about my parents kicking me out, about choosing to keep her even though everyone said I was throwing my life away, about picking teaching specifically because it gave me summers and afternoons with her. I made sure to say it without trying to make her feel guilty, that I'd never regretted choosing her even, when she made it really hard, because I wanted her to understand that my choices weren't failures, or giving up but active decisions I'd make again. She started crying and reached across the table to grab my hand, and we sat there like that for a long time while the budget spreadsheet glowed on the laptop screen between us. She pulled her hand back after a few minutes and wiped her eyes with her sleeve, then looked at me with this expression I hadn't seen in years, like she was seeing me as an actual person instead of just an ATM or a disappointment. She asked why I never told her about Northwestern before, why she had to find out like this when she was 16 instead of knowing her whole life. I closed the laptop and thought about how to explain it without making her feel worse than she already did. I told her I didn't want her growing up thinking she owed me anything, or that she ruined my life, because she didn't ruin anything. I chose her every single day, and would do it again. But maybe keeping it secret made her think I just gave up on myself instead of making an active choice to build a different life, one where I could be there for her instead of buried in medical school debt and residency hours. She nodded slowly and said she wished she'd known because it would have helped her understand why I made the choices I did, why I picked teaching and stayed in the same position and drove the old car. I reached across and squeezed her hand one more time before standing up to close the laptop, feeling exhausted but also like maybe we'd finally broken through something that had been building for years. The next morning, I woke up early out of habit, but stayed in bed listening to the sounds of the house, and around 8 I heard Lily's door open and her footsteps heading downstairs. I got up and made coffee, then heard the distinctive sound of her laptop opening at the kitchen table. When I walked in with my mug, she had her college essay document pulled up, and was staring at it with her chin in her hands, and I almost asked if she needed help, but caught myself and just sat down across from her with my coffee. She glanced up at me and said she was starting over on the essay, that the whole thing about no one being there was wrong because I'd always been there. She just hadn't seen it. I took a sip of coffee to hide how much that meant to me, and told her I'd be in the living room if she needed anything, then left her alone to work. Over the next few hours, I heard her typing in bursts, then stopping, then typing again, and I forced myself not to check on her or offer suggestions. By afternoon, she closed the laptop and went upstairs without showing me what she'd written, but the fact that she'd worked on it seriously for the first time in weeks felt like progress. That evening, while we were eating leftover pasta, I brought up her birthday and said I wanted to do a do-over party at home. Nothing fancy, just a few friends and homemade cake to replace the disaster at the restaurant. She immediately looked uncomfortable and said she didn't want a pity party, that having something small at home would just make it obvious we couldn't afford the real thing. I understood where she was coming from, but pushed back gently, saying it wasn't about affording anything. It was about celebrating with people who actually cared about her, instead of an empty table at an expensive restaurant. She picked at her pasta and said she didn't even know who she'd invite anymore since Mia. And Chloe weren't really her friends, and I suggested the kids from her classes who weren't part of that wealthy group, people she actually talked to about homework and projects instead of shopping trips. She was quiet for a long time before saying she'd think about it, and I left it there without pushing harder. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, our living room was set up with board games on the coffee table, and a chocolate cake I'd made that morning sitting on the kitchen counter with 16 candles stuck in slightly crooked. Lily had invited 3 kids from her classes, 2 girls and a guy who all showed up within 10 minutes of each other looking a little unsure about being at a home party instead of something at a venue. I stayed mostly in the kitchen giving them space, but I could hear them talking and laughing, and when I brought out the cake, they all sang happy birthday without any awkwardness. They played some card game I didn't recognize for over an hour, then switched to charades which got loud and silly, and I watched from the doorway as Lily actually smiled. Not the fake Instagram smile, but a real one that made her look like she did when she was younger. After everyone left and we were cleaning up the paper plates and cups, Lily said it was actually fun in a way the restaurant never would have been. That she didn't have to worry about ordering the right thing or looking poor. She could just hang out. While we were throwing away the last of the trash, Lily brought up the allowance situation without me prompting her, saying we needed to rethink the whole system because it obviously wasn't working. I braced myself for another demand for more money, but instead she said she'd been thinking about what Emmeline said in therapy about earning versus receiving. And maybe instead of a set allowance, I could just cover her actual needs and she could get a part-time job for the wants. I stared at her for a second because that was such a grown-up suggestion I didn't expect it, and I asked if she was serious about working. She nodded and said she wanted to try, that having her own money she earned might feel different from just getting cash from me, more real and more hers. I told her I thought that was a really mature idea and we could start looking for jobs that would work around her school schedule. Monday afternoon, I had a meeting scheduled with Antoinette at the school to go over Lily's remaining college deadlines and make sure nothing else fell through the cracks. I showed up 15 minutes early and waited in the counseling office, watching students come and go for their appointments. When Antoinette called me back, she had a folder with Lily's information, and we went through every deadline one by one, and I committed to being present for all of them, not just funding them or leaving money for application fees. She seemed encouraged by the progress and said she could tell something had shifted, that Lily seemed more focused in class and less distracted by her phone. I explained about the therapy and the budget conversation and the do-over party, and Antoinette offered to check in with us weekly to help keep us accountable, which I accepted gratefully. At the end of the month, Danielle called me into her office during my planning period, and I walked in expecting another warning about my performance. Instead, she sat me down and said she'd been watching my classes and grading, and she could see I was getting things back on track after whatever had been going on. She officially removed the informal warning from my file, then surprised me by offering to mentor me for a department leadership position that would open up next year, something that came with a small raise, but no extra evening hours since it was administrative during the school day. I accepted immediately, feeling like maybe I was finally moving forward in my career without sacrificing time with Lily. That same week, I ran into Lewis outside while getting the mail, and he mentioned that the cafe where he got his morning coffee was hiring for weekend shifts. He said he'd be happy to put in a word for Lily if she was serious about working, that the owner was flexible with students and the tips were decent. I thanked him and told Lily about it that evening, and she looked nervous but said she wanted to apply. Lewis gave me the owner's contact information, and Lily filled out an application online that night, then went in for an interview 2 days later. She got the job and was scheduled to start the following weekend. Her first shift was a Saturday morning, and she left the house at 6 looking both excited and terrified in the black shirt and apron they'd given her. I spent the morning doing laundry and trying not to text her to check in, giving her space to figure it out on her own. She came home at 2 looking completely exhausted, and immediately started complaining about rude customers who didn't tip, and how her feet hurt from standing for 8 hours. I sat down with her on the couch and just listened, validating her feelings without trying to lecture her about work ethic or telling her it would get easier. She went back for her second shift on Sunday without me having to push or remind her, and when she came home that day, she seemed a little less overwhelmed. The following Tuesday morning, I woke up and found Lily already in the kitchen pulling out the ingredients for French toast, and when I walked in, she told me to sit down because she wanted to try making it herself. I sat at the table and watched her crack eggs and mix the batter, offering tiny suggestions when she asked, but mostly letting her figure it out. We ate breakfast together and talked about small things, her upcoming chemistry test, and a new show she was watching. Nothing deep or intense, but just normal conversation. The next Tuesday, we did it again, both of us cooking this time, and it became our thing without us officially deciding it. Some mornings we talked about important stuff, other mornings we just made food and complained about being tired, but either way it felt like we were rebuilding something that had been broken, one breakfast at a time. Our next therapy session happened on Thursday afternoon, and Emmeline started by asking us each to apologize for one specific thing, not everything, just one particular moment we regretted most. I went first because Lily looked scared, and I said I was sorry for using money as a weapon instead of talking about the real problem, for punishing her with absence when what she needed was boundaries with presence. Lily picked at her nail polish for a full minute before she spoke, and then she apologized for calling me pathetic, and saying I chose to be poor, admitting she knew exactly how much those words would hurt me, and she said them anyway because she wanted me to feel as small as she felt around her friends. Emmeline asked us to sit with that for a moment, no fixing or explaining, just letting the apologies exist, and the silence felt heavy, but also kind of clean, like we'd lanced something infected. When we got home that evening, I brought up something I'd been thinking about and suggested we establish a new rule about phones at meals. No exceptions for either of us, which Lily immediately protested because she was always checking group chats during dinner. I held firm and said starting tomorrow at breakfast, we both put our phones in the basket on the counter during meals. No scrolling, no checking, just talking or eating in actual silence if we had nothing to say. The first few days were rough, and I caught myself reaching for my phone constantly during dinner, muscle memory from years of checking emails while Lily scrolled through social media across from me. Lily struggled even more and kept asking if she could just check one message, just see who texted, just look at one thing, but I said no every time and made myself stick to the rule too. After about a week, something shifted and we started actually talking during dinner, instead of sitting in parallel silence with our screens, small conversations about her chemistry test, or a funny thing that happened at work. Nothing deep but real connection happening naturally. On Monday morning, Lily opened her laptop at the kitchen table and pulled up her college essay document, 3 days before the final deadline that Antoinette had warned us about repeatedly. I desperately wanted to read over her shoulder, to offer suggestions, to make sure she was saying the right things, but I forced myself to leave the kitchen and do laundry instead, letting her own her work completely. She typed for hours that day, barely stopping for lunch, and when she finally submitted it that evening, she didn't show it to me or ask me to read it, just closed her laptop and said it was done. The next afternoon, I got an email from Antoinette saying the essay was strong and honest, that Lily had met all her deadlines for the first time this semester, and the relief I felt reading those words almost made me cry at my desk. At the end of the month, I logged into my bank account expecting to see the usual overdraft warnings and negative balance, but instead the account showed a positive number with a small surplus of $200. I stared at the screen for a solid minute trying to figure out if there was an error, then realized we'd actually finished a month without overdrafting for the first time since the experiment started, which felt like a huge victory, even though $200 wasn't much money in the grand scheme of things. During lunch period that week, I noticed through the cafeteria windows that Lily was sitting with different people, not Mia and Chloe, who were at their usual table near the windows, but some quieter kids from her English class. She started declining invitations to shopping trips when Mia texted her, making excuses about work or homework, and I could tell she was pulling away from that friend group naturally without me pushing it. One evening I asked if she was okay with losing those friendships, and she said she was grieving them, but she knew they weren't real friends. That real friends didn't make you feel bad about yourself constantly, which showed way more self-awareness than I expected from her. That Saturday, I suggested we go thrifting together, and Lily looked at me like I'd suggested we eat garbage, because months ago being seen at a thrift store would have mortified her completely. But she agreed to try it, and we drove to the big thrift store on the east side, spending 2 hours looking through racks of used clothes and vintage stuff. Lily found a brown leather jacket in the vintage section that fit her perfectly and cost $12, and she actually got excited about it, trying it on multiple times and checking herself in the mirror. She took a photo of herself wearing it and posted it online with a caption about sustainable fashion and shopping secondhand. And while some comments were snarky from her old friend group, she handled them without falling apart or deleting the post. On Tuesday morning, I opened my email before school and found a message from Antoinette saying Lily's grades had stabilized across all her classes, and her essay was strong enough that she felt confident about college acceptances when they started coming in spring. The relief was overwhelming, knowing we'd pulled back from the edge before permanent damage was done to her future, that the past few months of struggle hadn't destroyed her chances completely. That same week, Danielle called me into her office during my planning period, and I walked in nervous, but she sat me down and officially offered me the department leadership position for next fall. The job came with a $6,000 annual raise and predictable hours since it was administrative work during the school day, no evening commitments required, and I accepted immediately without even asking for time to think about it. Walking out of her office, I felt like maybe I was finally advancing in my career on my own terms, instead of sacrificing everything just to stay afloat, that I could provide better for Lily without destroying myself in the process. A few days later, Lily came home from her cafe shift and sat down at the kitchen table where I was grading papers, looking nervous about something. She told me she'd been saving her cafe money in a jar in her room, and she wanted to contribute $50 a month toward groceries once she had enough saved up, that she wanted to help. I was genuinely touched but told her that wasn't necessary, that she should save her money for things she wanted, but she insisted she wanted to contribute something. We compromised on her covering her own wants like movies and coffee with friends, keeping her work money for herself but being responsible for her own entertainment expenses instead of asking me for cash. Our next therapy session was scheduled for Thursday, and Emmeline started by asking what we'd each learned from this whole experience, the big picture takeaway from the past few months. Lily spoke first this time and said she learned that her mom's love was always there. She just couldn't see it under her own selfishness, that she'd been so focused on what she didn't have that she couldn't see what she did have. I said I learned that sacrifice without presence isn't actually sacrifice, it's just absence with good intentions, that giving Lily everything material while being emotionally unavailable was just another form of abandonment, even if it came from a place of love. Emmeline nodded and said we'd both done hard work, that most families never get to this point of honest recognition, and while we still had growth ahead of us, we'd built a foundation worth protecting. The first Tuesday after that session, I woke up at 6 a.m. and found Lily already in the kitchen pulling out the mixing bowl. She looked up when I walked in and asked if I wanted to help make pancakes instead of French toast for once. We stood side by side at the stove, her flipping while I mixed the next batch, and we talked about her history test coming up, and how one of her coworkers at the cafe kept burning the espresso. Some Tuesdays after that were deeper, like when she asked me if I ever regretted keeping her, and I told her honestly that I regretted the circumstances, but never her existence. Other mornings we just complained about being tired and argued about whether chocolate chips belonged in pancakes, and both kinds of mornings felt equally important. The ritual became something solid we could count on, a weekly anchor where we were just two people making breakfast together without the weight of everything else pressing down on us. 3 weeks into the routine, Lily came home from her Saturday cafe shift looking excited instead of exhausted. She dropped her apron on the counter and told me her manager had pulled her aside to say she had great work ethic and asked if she wanted more hours. I watched her face light up as she explained that she'd been promoted from dish duty to actually making drinks, and the manager said customers liked her. She sat down at the kitchen table and said something that surprised me, that having her own money she earned felt completely different from an allowance. She said when someone gave you money, it felt temporary and conditional, but when you earned it yourself, it was real and yours in a way that mattered. I told her I was proud of her, and she smiled without the defensive edge she used to have, just genuine happiness about doing something well. The following weekend, I asked Lily if she wanted to take a drive with me, and when she asked where, I said I wanted to show her my old high school. We drove 40 minutes to the neighborhood where I grew up, and I parked in front of the building that looked smaller and more run down than I remembered. I walked her to the science lab where I found out I was pregnant during sophomore year, standing in the bathroom stall reading the test while my chemistry class continued without me. She asked what I felt in that moment, and I told her the truth, that I was terrified and excited and completely unprepared all at once. We sat on the front steps where I told my parents and I described how my mom cried, and my dad said I'd ruined my future, and they gave me 2 weeks to figure out somewhere else to live. Lily asked what I was like at 16, and I admitted I was impulsive and scared and made plenty of mistakes, that I wasn't some perfect person who had everything together. I let her see me as a real person who was once her age and confused, not just as her mom who was supposed to have all the answers. That evening after we got home, I made spaghetti while Lily finished uploading her last college application. She came into the kitchen around 7 and announced she was officially done with all her submissions, and I suggested we celebrate with dinner. We sat at our small kitchen table with the pasta and cheap wine for me and sparkling cider for her, and she thanked me for not giving up on her even when she was awful. I looked at her across the table and said I never considered giving up, even when I was handling things badly, because that's what being a parent means. She nodded, and we ate in comfortable silence, and I felt like maybe we'd actually turned a corner instead of just pretending things were better. A few days later, I ran into Lewis outside while getting the mail, and he stopped to say he'd noticed positive changes lately. He said Lily seemed happier and more grounded when he saw her, less stressed and more like a regular teenager instead of someone carrying too much weight. I thanked him for being willing to be our emergency contact, and for caring about us when he didn't have to. He waved it off and said, "Neighbors look out for each other." But I realized in that moment that accepting help from others didn't make me a failure. I'd spent so long trying to do everything alone that I forgot community support was supposed to be normal, not a sign of weakness. The next week at the school, Danielle caught me in the hallway between classes and mentioned in passing that other teachers had noticed I seemed more present and engaged lately. She said she was glad to see me finding balance because burned-out teachers can't help their students or their families. It hit me that the changes we'd made at home were visible to people around me, not just something Lily and I felt internally. The validation from someone outside our situation reinforced that we were actually making progress instead of just going through the motions. In March, I came home from work to find Lily sitting on the front steps holding a large envelope. She looked up with tears in her eyes and said her first college acceptance had arrived, a state school with a decent scholarship that would cover most of tuition. I suggested we celebrate with ice cream, and we drove to the place near our house that made waffle cones. Sitting in the parking lot with our ice cream melting in the afternoon sun, she talked about the program she'd applied for and how excited she was about the campus. She didn't compare it to where Mia and Chloe were going, or complain about it not being fancy enough. She was just genuinely happy about her own path forward. I watched her talk about dorm life and class schedules, and realized she'd stopped measuring her life against other people's standards. Our final scheduled therapy session with Emmeline happened on a Thursday afternoon in late March. We sat in the familiar office with the comfortable chairs, and Emmeline started by saying we'd made remarkable progress over the past few months. She explained that we didn't need weekly sessions anymore, but she'd be available if we needed tune-ups when things got hard again. Both Lily and I felt proud of the work we'd done, sitting there knowing it wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Emmeline reminded us that healing isn't linear and we'd probably have setbacks, but we'd built tools to handle them now instead of falling back into old patterns. Walking out of her office felt like graduating from something important, scary and hopeful at the same time. On a quiet Sunday morning 3 months after that devastating birthday, I woke up to the smell of cinnamon and vanilla coming from downstairs. I walked into the kitchen to find Lily at the stove making French toast, the same recipe I'd made every Tuesday for years. She looked up when I came in and plated a portion for me, then pointed to the kitchen table and said, "Sit down." She had this. My eyes filled with tears watching her move around the kitchen with confidence, remembering how to flip the bread at exactly the right moment and how much cinnamon I liked. She brought both plates to the table and sat down across from me without her phone, just the two of us and breakfast. We ate together in comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need filling with conversation or distraction. I looked at my daughter across the table, Really seeing her for the first time in months instead of seeing my fears or failures reflected back. She wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But we were connected again in a real way. Not through money or guilt, but through genuine effort and love. Through showing up and doing the work even when it was hard. The road ahead would have challenges, because life always does. But we were finally facing them together. Not with me sacrificing everything while she took it for granted, and not with cash as a substitute for actual presence. Just two people who loved each other learning how to do it better. One Tuesday breakfast at a time, and that made all the difference in the world. That's the end of this story. Thank you for being here and sharing a few minutes with me. I hope it brought something good to your day, or at least made you smile. Subscribe if you want to keep this little circle of kindness going.